I wish I had burned it. Looking back now, standing in the ashes of the life I thought was mine, I honestly wish I had just thrown it into the fireplace the moment I touched that cold, cracked leather. They say the truth sets you free, don't they? That is the biggest lie ever told to comfort the naive. The truth doesn't free you. The truth hunts you. It skins you alive. It takes everything you love, every warm memory you hold dear, and twists it into something unrecognizable before handing it back to you broken. My grandfather, Elias Thorne, was my hero. He was the man who taught me how to tie my shoes when my hands were too small to manage the laces. He was the man who taught me how to fish in the lake behind our house, teaching me the value of patience and silence. At his funeral, 300 people stood in the torrential rain just to pay their respects. They called him a pillar of the community. They called him a saint. But saints don't keep journals like this. Saints don't number their sins in a notebook hidden beneath the floorboards. There were 12 entries. Just 12. When I first opened it, I thought they were memoirs. I thought they were war stories, or maybe love letters to my grandmother who passed away years ago, echoes of a romance I had only seen in faded photographs. I was so incredibly naive. I read the first one, and I felt a slight unease. I read the fifth one, and I felt sick to my stomach. But when I got to the 12th secret, the 12th secret didn't just change my past, it erased my future. It changed my name. It changed the blood running through my veins. And now that I know what he did, I don't know if I'm the victim in this story, or if I am the accomplice, just by knowing it. I wasn't ready for what I saw. Nobody could ever be ready for that. The house always smelled like cedarwood and stale pipe tobacco, a scent that used to make me feel safe, like a heavy wool blanket wrapped around my shoulders on a winter night. Even now, 3 days after the funeral, walking into his study felt like trespassing. I expected to see him sitting there in his high-backed oak chair, reading the morning paper, the smoke curling up from his pipe. Grandpa Elias was a man of absolute routine and precision. He woke up at 6 a.m. sharp, drank his coffee black and spent his mornings in this study. "Important business, Adam," he would tell me when I was a kid, tapping my nose with his calloused finger, his blue eyes twinkling with a kindness that I now know was a mask. A man must always keep his affairs in order. Order is what separates us from the chaos. I believed him. I idolized him. My father left when I was 4 years old, vanishing into the ether of deadbeat dads, leaving only a void that Elias filled completely. He became everything to me. Father, mentor, best friend. He paid for my college tuition without blinking an eye. He walked me through my first heartbreak when I was 16. He was the rock our entire family clung to, the foundation that held us up. "You're the executor of the estate, Adam," his lawyer, Mr. Henderson, had told me after the service, handing me a heavy set of keys. "He trusted you more than anyone, even more than your mother." It made sense at the time. Mom was fragile. She had never quite recovered from Dad leaving us. She carried a perpetual sadness in her eyes, a skittishness that made her jump at loud noises. She had always had a strange, strained relationship with Grandpa. They were polite, of course, but cold. Like two strangers sharing a taxi ride that was lasting too long. I always assumed it was just a personality clash. Grandpa was stern and stoic. Mom was emotional and free-spirited. I never questioned it. I never looked closer at the tension that tightened her jaw whenever he walked into the room. I was tasked with clearing out the study. It was supposed to be a simple weekend job. Sort the books, donate the old clothes to charity, file the papers for the taxman. It felt invasive, touching his things, like I was violating a sacred treaty between us. I picked up his favorite fountain pen, the heavy brass one he used to sign checks. I rolled it between my fingers, feeling the weight of it, the cold metal warming against my skin. I could almost hear his voice echoing in the silence of the room. "Integrity, Adam. That's all a man has in the end. His name and his word. If you lose that, you lose everything. Integrity. That word echoes in my head now like a cruel, bad joke. I was moving the heavy oak chair behind his desk to get to the lower shelves when I saw it. The floorboards. Grandpa was obsessed with maintenance. This house was built in the 1920s, but he kept it in pristine condition. Nothing squeaked. Nothing was out of place. But there, right where his feet would have rested for 40 years while he sat at that desk, the varnish on the floorboards was scratched, distinctly. I'd knelt down, my knees cracking on the hard wood. The floor felt cold under my fingertips. It wasn't just wear and tear from his shoes. It was a seam, a precise cut in the wood that was almost invisible unless you were down on your hands and knees, looking for it with a suspicion I didn't know I had. I shouldn't have looked. I should have stood up, finished packing the books into the cardboard boxes, and gone home to my wife. I should have let the dead keep their secrets buried. But curiosity is a poison that tastes sweet until you swallow it, and I was already taking the first sip. I grabbed a letter opener from the desk. It was a silver blade, dull but sturdy. I wedged it into the crack between the boards. The wood groaned as I applied pressure. It didn't want to give. It fought me, as if the house itself was trying to protect his legacy. "Come on," I whispered to the empty room, my voice trembling slightly. With a loud crack that sounded like a gunshot in the quiet house, the board popped up. It wasn't just a loose plank, it was a false bottom, a hidden compartment lined with velvet that had long since rotted away into grey dust. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic rhythm that made my hands shake. I expected to find money. Grandpa didn't trust banks. He always said they were thieves in suits. I expected stacks of cash, maybe some gold coins he had hoarded against a rainy day. Or maybe nothing, just a space for insulation or pipes. But there was no gold, there was no cash, there was only a book. I reached into the dark, musty hole. My hand closed around it. It was heavy, heavier than paper should be. It was bound in black leather that felt oily to the touch, worn smooth by years of handling. A thick piece of twine was wrapped around it 3 times, sealed with a glob of red wax. Not a stamp, just a messy thumbprint pressed into the hot wax while it was still soft. Grandpa's thumbprint. I sat back on my heels, holding it in my lap. The room felt suddenly freezing, the temperature dropping 10 degrees in a second. You know that feeling when you walk into a room and you know you're not alone? That primal instinct that screams danger, that was screaming at me now. I looked at the cover. No name, no date. Just a small, embossed symbol in the corner that had almost faded away. I squinted at it in the dim light. It looked like a scale. Like the scales of justice, but tilted, broken. I reached for the scissors on the desk. My hand hovered over the twine. "Don't!" a voice in my head whispered. It sounded like my mother. "Leave it, Adam. Some things remain buried for a reason." But I couldn't stop. He was my grandfather. I knew him. He was the most honest man I had ever met. What could he possibly have hidden under the floorboards of his study? A diary, bad poetry, plans for the garden? I cut the twine. The sound of the scissors snipping through the fibers was loud, final. The twine fell away like a dead snake. I opened the cover. The first page was blank, except for a single line written in the center in his impeccable, cursive handwriting. "For the day when I can no longer carry the weight. If you are reading this, I am judged already." A chill went down my spine that had nothing to do with the temperature. Judged. Judged by whom? God. The law. I turned the page. Entry number 1. October 14th, 1984. The date hit me instantly. October 1984. That was the year my parents got married. I started reading, and the world began to tilt. The money wasn't an inheritance, he wrote. The $50,000 for the wedding. It wasn't from savings. I took it from the terrified man in the warehouse on 4th Street. He cried for his children. I told him silence was the price of survival. He paid. I bought the dress. I bought the cake. Every smile at that wedding was paid for with extortion. I stopped breathing. The wedding. Mom always talked about how beautiful it was, how Grandpa had surprised them with the lavish reception. He had told everyone he saved for years, putting away pennies, extortion, Grandpa, the man who returned extra change to cashiers. "This is a joke," I said aloud. My voice sounded thin, pathetic in the empty room. He's writing fiction, a novel. He was trying to write a crime novel. But the handwriting, it was shaky in parts, rushed, as if he was writing it immediately after it happened, trying to purge the memory from his brain onto the paper. The ink was smeared in places, as if his hand had been sweating. I should have closed it there. I should have accepted that maybe he did one bad thing 40 years ago to help his daughter. People make mistakes, right? He did it for family. He did it for love. But there were pages and pages. I turned to entry number 2. May 12th, 1988. "The fire at the mill," the entry began. I froze. The old textile mill fire. It was a local tragedy in our town. 2 people died. The town talked about it for decades. It was ruled an accident, faulty wiring in the old structure. "They wouldn't sell," I read, the words swimming before my eyes. "I needed the land for the new development deal. The wiring was fine. I used gasoline and a timer. I didn't know the night watchman was inside. I didn't know he had his son with him. I watched it burn from the hill. I heard the sirens, and I felt nothing but relief that the deal would go through." My stomach violently lurched. I dry-heaved, clutching my chest, doubling over on the floor. He killed them, my grandfather, the man who taught me to fish. He burned 2 people alive for a real estate deal. No, this was impossible. This was dementia. Was he sick earlier than we thought? Was he confessing to crimes he saw on the news, his mind mixing reality with fiction? But the details were too precise. The location of the timer, the specific type of gasoline canister. I picked the book up again. My hands were shaking so bad I could barely turn the pages. I had to know. I had to find something that proved this was fiction. I skimmed ahead. Entry number 4 involved theft from the church fund. Entry number 7 detailed the bribery of a local judge to hide a building code violation. Entry number 9 described a hit-and-run that left a teenage girl paralyzed in 1995. I remembered that year. I was 10 years old. Grandpa came home late one night with a massive dent in his bumper. He looked pale, shaken. He told me he hit a deer on the back roads. I helped him wash the blood off the fender with the garden hose. I remembered the metallic smell of the blood. I remembered scrubbing the red stains until the chrome shined again. It wasn't a deer, the notebook read, the ink stark and accusatory. Her name was Sarah. She looked right at me before I drove away. I saw her eyes. She was just a child, and I left her there in the snow. I helped him wash the blood. I was 10 years old, and I helped him destroy evidence of a crime that destroyed a girl's life. I fell back into the chair, tears streaming down my face, soaking my shirt. My entire life, every memory I had with him, was being rewritten in real time. The ice cream he bought me, bought with blood money, the car he gave me for graduation, bought with silence. The respect the town had for him, bought with lies. But I kept reading. I was drawn to the end, like a moth to a flame. To the number 12. The entries got darker, more desperate. The handwriting became more erratic, the pen pressing so hard it nearly tore the paper. But nothing, absolutely nothing, prepared me for the final one, the last entry. It was dated just 3 weeks ago, 2 days before he died in his sleep. Entry number 12. It didn't start with a date. It started with a name. My name. Adam, it read. My dearest boy. If you have read this far, you know the monster I am. But you don't know the worst of it. You think you are my grandson. You think your father left because he was a coward. I stopped. My heart felt like it had stopped beating in my chest. I looked at the door of the study, half expecting my mother to walk in, to catch me, to stop this nightmare. The silence of the house was deafening. The secrets were screaming from the pages. I looked back at the page. The words blurred through my tears, but I forced myself to focus. Your father didn't leave Adam. He found out. He found out about the mill. He found out about the money. He was going to the police. He was going to take you away from me. He threatened to expose everything. I couldn't turn the page. I physically couldn't do it. My hand was paralyzed. Because I knew. In that split second, before I even read the next line, I knew. And I knew that once I read it, Adam Thorne, the person I thought I was, would cease to exist. I sat there on the floor for what felt like hours, but the grandfather clock in the hallway told me it had only been 20 minutes. 20 minutes to dismantle 32 years of history. The house, usually so silent, suddenly felt alive with noise. The settling of the wood sounded like footsteps. The wind against the window sounded like hushed whispers. I felt watched. I felt the heavy, judgmental gaze of Elias Thorne staring at me from every framed photograph on the wall. I scrambled to my feet, my legs numb, and shoved the notebook under my shirt, pressing the cold leather against my skin. I couldn't leave it here. If I left it, the house might swallow it back up, or worse, someone else might find it. I heard the crunch of gravel on the driveway. A car door slammed. It was my mother. Panic, sharp and electric, shot through me. I couldn't face her. Not yet. Not with this bomb strapped to my chest. I frantically replaced the false floorboard, smoothing the rug over the scratches, trying to erase the evidence of my discovery. I stood up, wiping the dust from my knees just as the front door opened. Adam, her voice floated up the stairs, fragile and weary. Are you up there? I took a deep breath, trying to steady my shaking hands. In the study, Mom, I called back. My voice sounded foreign to my own ears, too high, too strained. She walked in a moment later, carrying a tray with 2 cups of tea. She looked older than she had a week ago. The grief had carved deep lines around her mouth and eyes. She was wearing a black cardigan that seemed to swallow her small frame. I thought you might need a break, she said, setting the tray down on the desk, right next to the scissors I had used to cut the twine. She looked around the room, her eyes lingering on the empty shelves. It looks empty. He hated empty spaces. I watched her closely, searching for cracks in the mask. Did she know? She had lived in this house with him for most of her life. She was the beneficiary of his hard work. She sipped her tea, her hand trembling slightly. Did you find anything important? She asked. The question hung in the air, heavy with implication. Just books and old tax returns, I lied. The lie tasted like ash. Why? Was there something specific I should be looking for? She hesitated. Just for a fraction of a second, her eyes darted to the floor, specifically to the rug where the notebook had been hidden. It was a microscopic movement, a flicker of anxiety, but I saw it. No, she said quickly, too quickly. Just, he had so many papers. I worry about you taking on all this burden alone, Adam. Maybe we should just hire a service to clear the rest, burn the papers, sell the books. Burn the papers. My stomach tightened. No, I said, stepping closer to her. I need to do this. He wanted me to do this. The tension in the room was suffocating. I realized then that my mother wasn't just grieving. She was afraid. She was terrified of what was in this room. I finished my tea in one gulp, the hot liquid burning my throat, and told her I needed to go home to check on my wife. I needed to get out of there. I needed to be alone with the notebook. As I walked to my car, I felt her watching me from the window. I didn't look back. I drove 3 towns over to a motel off the interstate. I couldn't go home. I couldn't bring this darkness into the house I shared with my wife. I rented a room that smelled of stale cigarettes and bleach, locked the door, and sat on the edge of the sagging bed. I pulled the notebook out. I needed to verify it. I needed proof before I let the 12th entry destroy me completely. I flipped back to entry number 5, June 1990. The union rep, he was getting too loud about the safety violations. I paid Henderson to falsify the report, but the man wouldn't stop. I had to make a call to my friends in the city. They broke his legs in the parking lot. He never walked without a cane again, but the strike ended. Henderson, the family lawyer, the man who had handed me the keys just days ago, the man who had patted my shoulder and told me my grandfather was a man of honor. I grabbed my phone and searched for the name of the union rep from 1990. It took me 10 minutes of scrolling through archived news articles. There it was, local union leader assaulted in brutal attack. Police had no leads. The article mentioned he was crippled for life. It was real, all of it was real. The monster wasn't a metaphor. It was Elias, and Henderson was his cleaner. I felt a surge of rage so pure it nearly blinded me. I had trusted these men. I had looked up to them. I stood up and paced the small room, the notebook lying on the bed like a radioactive isotope. But the question that burned hottest wasn't about the union rep, or the mill fire, or the girl in the snow. It was about entry number 12. It was about my father. Your father didn't leave. I sat back down and forced myself to read the rest of that final entry. The handwriting was barely legible. A scrawl of a dying man desperate to unburden his soul. He found the ledger, Adam. He found the proof of the mill fire. He was a good man, your father, too good for this family. He confronted me in the garage. He had the phone in his hand. He was going to call the sheriff. I couldn't let him destroy everything I built. I couldn't let him take you away. We fought. He fell. God help me, he fell hard. It was an accident, or maybe it wasn't. I don't know anymore, but he didn't leave town, Adam. He never left. The room spun. I grabbed the trash can and retched, but nothing came out. My father, the man I had spent 30 years hating for abandoning me, the man I had cursed every Father's Day, he hadn't left me. He had died trying to do the right thing. He had died trying to protect the innocent. And my grandfather, my hero, had killed him, and then he had buried the truth, just like he buried the money, just like he buried his conscience. But where? He never left. The words echoed in my skull. If he never left, where was he? I frantically scanned the rest of the page. I couldn't move him far. The foundation. We were pouring the concrete for the new guest house the next morning. It was the only way. He is close to you, Adam. He has always been close. You've been sleeping 20 feet above him your entire life. The guest house, the small cottage in the backyard where I had lived during college, where my wife and I had stayed when we first got married. I had slept there. I had laughed there. I had lived my life on top of my father's grave. The horror was absolute. It was a physical weight, crushing my lungs. I couldn't breathe. I gasped for air, clawing at my collar. The betrayal was total. It wasn't just murder. It was a desecration of my entire reality. Every happy memory I had in that guest house was now a scene from a horror movie. I drove back. I didn't think. I just drove. The rain was coming down hard now, slashing against the windshield, mirroring the chaos inside my head. It was dark when I pulled into the driveway. The main house was dark, but a single light burned in the kitchen window. Mom was still up. I parked the car, but I didn't go to the guest house. I couldn't look at it. I marched to the back door of the main house. I was drenched by the time I reached the porch, shivering from the cold and the adrenaline. I burst through the door. Mom was sitting at the kitchen table, her hands wrapped around a mug of cold tea. She jumped when I entered, her eyes wide with fear. She saw my face. She saw the rain dripping from my hair, the wild look in my eyes, and she saw the black notebook in my hand. The color drained from her face instantly, leaving her looking like a ghost. She didn't ask what it was. She knew. "Adam," she whispered, standing up, her chair scraping loudly against the floor. "Adam, please." "Did you know?" I asked. My voice was low, dangerous, a growl. "Did you know about the notebook?" She trembled, backing away until she hit the counter. I knew he kept a journal. I never read it. He forbade it." "Don't lie to me," I screamed, slamming the notebook onto the kitchen table. The sound cracked like a whip. "Don't you dare lie to me, not now, not after everything. Did you know about the mill? Did you know about the girl? Did you know about Dad?" At the mention of my father, she flinched as if I had slapped her. She brought her hands to her mouth, tears spilling over instantly. She shook her head frantically. But it wasn't a denial of truth. It was a denial of reality. She didn't want to hear it. "He told me Dad left," I said, stepping closer, cornering her. "He told me Dad was a coward who didn't love us. He let me grow up hating my own father, and you let him say it." "He protected us," she screamed back, her voice cracking. The confession hung in the air. She stopped, realizing what she had said. "Protected us?" I laughed, a harsh, broken sound. "Is that what you call it? He's a murderer, Mum. He killed people and—" I choked on the words. "He killed Dad." She collapsed. Her legs just gave out, and she slid down the front of the cabinets to the floor, sobbing uncontrollably. "No," she wailed. "No, he told me it was an accident. He told me David tried to attack him. He said it was self-defense. He said if the police found out, they would take everything, the house, the money, you. He did it for you, Adam. He did everything for you." "He buried him under the guest house," I whispered. The words killed the last piece of the boy I used to be. "I lived there. You let me live there." She looked up at me, her face a ruin of mascara and tears. "I didn't have a choice. He was my father. He was all we had. David was gone. He was already gone. I couldn't lose you too." Elias said. He said if I spoke a word, he would turn himself in and we would be left with nothing. No home, no money. Just shame. "I wanted to give you a good life, Adam. I wanted you to be happy." Happy. I looked at her, seeing her for the first time, not as my mother, but as an accomplice. A woman who had traded her husband's justice for a comfortable life. A woman who had walked over her husband's grave every day to water her garden. You traded him. You traded Dad for this house, for that blood money. "I did it for you," she shrieked, hitting the floor with her fist. "You went to the best schools. You never went hungry. You had a grandfather who adored you. Was that a lie? Was his love a lie? No, he loved you more than anything in this world. He carried that guilt every single day so you wouldn't have to. He suffered so you could shine." "He didn't suffer," I said, cold as ice. "He wrote it down. He catalogued it like a trophy collection. And now—" I picked up the notebook. "Now it's over. I'm going to the police." "No!" She lunged at me, grabbing my arm. Her grip was surprisingly strong. "You can't. He's dead, Adam. It won't bring anyone back. It will only destroy us. The town. They will hate us. They will tear this family apart. Your wife, your job. Think about what this will do to your life. Just burn it. Please, Adam, burn it and let him rot in hell, but don't drag us down with him." I looked at the notebook, then at my mother. She was begging me to keep the secret, to become the next keeper of the lies, to become Elias. It was a seductive offer. Burn the book, forget the past, keep the money, keep the reputation. But then I thought of my father. I thought of David, a man I never knew, lying in the cold dark under the concrete, waiting for his son to find him. "Let go of me," I said. "Adam, please." I said, "Let go." I ripped my arm away. I turned to the door, the adrenaline surging again. I had to go. I had to end this. But as I reached for the handle, the back door opened. Standing there, framed by the rain and the darkness, was Mr. Henderson, the lawyer. He was wearing a long trench coat dripping wet, and in his hand he held a revolver. He wasn't looking at me. He was looking at the notebook in my hand. "I told Elias he should have burned that thing," Henderson said calmly, stepping into the kitchen and closing the door behind him. "But the old fool was sentimental. He wanted to be remembered, even if it was as a villain." My mother screamed. I froze. The nightmare hadn't ended with the reading of the 12th secret. It was just beginning. The silence in the kitchen was heavier than the thunder rattling the window panes. Mr. Henderson stood there, a statue of malice wrapped in a wet trench coat, the revolver steady in his hand. The water dripping from the brim of his hat hit the linoleum floor with a rhythmic tap, tap, tap that sounded like a countdown. My mother was frozen on the floor, her hands covering her mouth, her eyes wide with a terror that transcended grief. She looked at Henderson, then at me, and I saw the realization dawn on her face. She hadn't known about the gun. She hadn't known it would go this far. She thought she was protecting a legacy, but she had been protecting a viper. "Put the notebook on the table, Adam," Henderson said, his voice calm, professional, the same tone he used when discussing probate law or tax loopholes. "Slide it over, nice and slow. You're a smart kid. You went to a good college. Don't throw it all away for a dead man's conscience." I looked at the notebook in my hand. The leather felt hot against my palm. I looked at Henderson, really looked at him for the first time. I saw the coldness in his grey eyes, the lack of hesitation. And then pieces of the puzzle slammed into place with the force of a physical blow. The entry about my father, the handwriting. I had noticed it before. It was jagged, pressed hard, unlike the elegant script of the earlier pages. I thought it was guilt. But looking at Henderson's gun, looking at the man who had handled the Union rep's broken legs, I realized it wasn't guilt. It was duress. "You killed him," I said. It wasn't a question. The realization hit me in the gut. "Grandpa didn't kill my father. You did." Henderson's smile was thin, razor sharp. He didn't deny it. He didn't even blink. "Elias was a great businessman, Adam, but he was weak when it counted. He didn't have the stomach for the wet work. When your father found out about the mill fire, when he threatened to go to the sheriff, Elias tried to talk him down. He begged him. But your father, he was righteous, self-righteous. He reached for the phone." Henderson adjusted his grip on the revolver. "Elias couldn't pull the trigger. He froze. So I did what was necessary to protect the firm, to protect the family." "And you made him write it," I whispered, the horror rising in my throat like bile. "You made him take the blame in the book." "Insurance," Henderson shrugged. "I told Elias that if he didn't cover for me, if he didn't dispose of the body and keep his mouth shut, I wouldn't stop with David. I told him I'd pay a visit to the nursery. You were 4 years old, Adam. Cute kid." My mother let out a sound that wasn't human. It was a keen of pure agony. She scrambled up from the floor, disregarding the gun, disregarding everything. "You threatened Adam?" she screamed, her voice tearing. "You told me it was an accident. You told me Elias did it to save us." "I told you what you needed to hear to keep you quiet, Martha," Henderson snapped, his eyes never leaving me. "And it worked for 30 years. Don't grow a conscience now. It's too late. Now, Adam. The book." I held the notebook tighter. This was the twist. This was the truth buried under the lies. My grandfather hadn't been a monster who killed his son-in-law to save his fortune. He had been a hostage. He had lived the last 30 years of his life in a prison of silence, accepting the label of a murderer, letting his own daughter hate him, letting me grow up thinking my father abandoned me, all to keep Henderson away from me. The monster had sacrificed his soul to ensure I survived. The entries in the book, they weren't just confessions. They were evidence. He had kept them, hidden them, knowing that one day when he was gone and the threat to my life was lower, I would find them. "He didn't leave this for me to read," I said, my voice shaking with a mix of rage and sudden, overwhelming love for the old man. "He left this for me to use." "Give it to me," Henderson barked, losing his composure. He took a step forward, raising the gun. "No," I said. The next 3 seconds happened in slow motion. Henderson's finger tightened on the trigger. I braced myself to die in my childhood kitchen, but then, a blur of motion, my mother, small, fragile, terrified Martha, lunged. She didn't go for the gun. She threw herself at Henderson's legs with the ferocity of a mother lion protecting her cub. It was an act of suicide, an act of redemption. Bang! The gunshot was deafening in the enclosed space. Plaster exploded from the wall behind me. Henderson stumbled back, tripping over my mother, cursing. The gun skittered across the floor. I didn't think. I reacted. I dove for the gun. My hand closed around the cold steel just as Henderson kicked me in the ribs. The pain was blinding, but I held on. I rolled onto my back, gasping for air, and leveled the revolver at him. "Stop!" I screamed. Henderson froze. He was panting, his hair wild, his coat disheveled. My mother was lying on the floor, groaning, clutching her shoulder. There was blood, but she was moving. She was alive. "It's over," I said, my voice sounding like gravel. "It's finally over." We held that tableau for what felt like an eternity, the rain hammering the roof, my mother's soft whimpers, the heavy breathing of 2 men who knew that only one of them was leaving this room free. Then the sound of sirens, distant at first, then rising, getting louder, cutting through the storm. Henderson's shoulders slumped. He looked at me, then at the notebook on the table. "He beat me," he muttered, almost impressed. "The old bastard finally beat me from the grave." Grandpa hadn't just left the notebook. He had triggered a failsafe. I found out later, from the lawyer who wasn't on Henderson's payroll, that Grandpa had a letter delivered to the state police in the event of his death, a letter that simply said, "Check the floorboards. Ask Adam." The police swarmed the house. They took Henderson away in cuffs. They took my mother to the hospital. The bullet had grazed her shoulder, breaking the collarbone, but missing the artery. She would survive, physically at least. But the real ending didn't happen in the kitchen. It happened 2 days later. I stood in the backyard, under the grey, weeping sky. The police forensic team had brought in the excavators. The beautiful garden, Grandpa's pride and joy, was turned into a mud pit. The yellow tape fluttered in the wind. I watched from the porch as the machine dug into the earth beneath the guest house. I saw the moment they found him. The operator stopped the machine. Men in white suits jumped down into the hole. They stopped moving. They took off their hats. My knees gave out. I sat on the wet steps of the porch and wept. I wept for David, the father I never knew who died trying to be a hero. I wept for Elias, the grandfather who died a slow death of shame every single day for 30 years to keep me breathing. I wept for my mother, who had lived in a cage of fear so small she couldn't stand up. The investigation revealed everything. The notebook was the key. It corroborated the forensic evidence found on my father's remains. It matched the timeline of the union rep's assault. Henderson was charged with capital murder, racketeering, and extortion. He would never see the sun again. My mother avoided prison. Her cooperation, combined with the evidence of extreme duress and domestic terror she lived under, led to a plea deal. She got probation and community service, but her real sentence was the memory of her silence. We talk now, but it's different. The trust is a broken mirror. We can see each other, but the image is fractured. I sold the house. I couldn't live there. I couldn't raise my own children on top of a graveyard. I burned the furniture. I sold the land to the city to become a park named David's Rest. I kept the notebook. Sometimes late at night, when the house is quiet and my wife is asleep beside me, I take it out of the safe. I run my fingers over the scarred leather. I don't read the first 11 entries anymore. I only read the last page, not the entry about the murder, but the very last line written on the back cover in shaky, dying handwriting. I hadn't seen it that first night. I only found it after the dust had settled. Adam, forgive me. I became a monster so you could be a man. Live the life I stole for you. Be happy. That is the only forgiveness I need. I closed the book. The truth didn't set me free. It destroyed me. It burned my life to the ground. But as I look at my own son sleeping in his crib, innocent and safe, I realize something. Forest fires are destructive, yes. They consume everything, but they also clear the dead wood. They return the nutrients to the soil, and from the ashes something new, something stronger can finally grow. I am Adam Thorne, and for the first time in my life, I know exactly who I am.